Hello and welcome to the Learn English Lab. I'm Mike, and I am so glad you could join us for today's deep dive. We're going to be exploring a technique that can seriously boost your English speaking skills. It's called shadowing, and I've got just the expert to help us break it all down. Sarah, welcome to the lab.
Thanks for having me, Mike. I'm excited to dive into this with you and all our listeners.
So shadowing, it sounds kind of mysterious, maybe even a little intimidating, but from what I've heard, it's all about mimicking native English speakers.
Yeah.
To improve your pronunciation, your intonation, even your fluency. Is that right?
That's the core idea, yeah. Just imagine listening to someone speaking English and then trying to repeat what they're saying almost. Simultaneously, like their shadow. You're not just focusing on the words themselves, but also their tone, their rhythm, how they stress certain syllables. It's about capturing those nuances of how they speak.
Okay, so it's like a vocal workout where you're training your mouth to move in the same way as a native speaker. I'm starting to get the picture, but I think what our listeners are really curious about is why this works. Why is simply mimicking someone so effective for learning a language?
That's a great question. And the answer lies in how our brains process language. When you shadow, you're forced to listen very intently. You're dissecting sounds, intonation patterns, the natural pauses and flow of speech. Your brain goes into overdrive trying to make sense of it all, and that active engagement is what supercharges your learning.
So it's like your brain is working out too, not just your mouth. But let's get practical for a second. Say our listener is completely new to shadowing. Where do they even begin?
Well, the beauty of shadowing is you don't need any fancy equipment. It starts with choosing some audio to work with, and this is crucial. It needs to be something you actually enjoy listening to, because you'll be spending a lot of time with it.
That makes sense. You wouldn't want to be stuck shadowing a boring lecture if you're secretly a true crime podcast fanatic.
Exactly. If you're a beginner, start with something clear and easy to follow. Maybe a podcast designed for English learners or some YouTube channels with subtitles. As you get more comfortable, you can move on to things like TED Talks or even audiobooks.
So start simple and then level up as you go. Got it. But choosing the audio is just the first step, right? What comes next?
Right. Once you've got your material, you need to set the scene. Find a quiet place where you won't be interrupted. Grab some headphones if you want to really focus in. If the audio comes with a transcript, have that handy as well. Then, just like an athlete wouldn't jump into a race without warming up. It's good to do some vocal warm-ups before you start shadowing.
I'm picturing tongue twisters and funny faces in the mirror.
Absolutely anything to get those muscles moving and ready to go. Once you're all warmed up, it's time for the first listen. This time through, don't worry about shadowing just yet. Just listen to the audio all the way through, focusing on understanding the content and paying attention to the speaker's pronunciation and rhythm.
So it's all about absorbing the sounds, getting familiar with the speaker's style, and then the real shadowing begins.
You got it, now hit play again. But this time, as soon as the speaker starts talking, start repeating after them. The key here is not to try and speak at the exact same time. Instead, repeat immediately after them like an echo. This is called lagged shadowing, and it gives you that tiny bit of space to process what you're hearing and try to mimic it accurately.
Lag shadowing. I like that. But let's be real, Sarah. Our listeners are human. They're going to make mistakes. I know I would. Is that okay?
Of course, shadowing isn't about being perfect. It's about progress. It's about training your ear and your mouth to work together. So don't get discouraged if you stumble. Just keep going.
Love that advice. Embrace the stumbles. Okay, so our listener is shadowing along, trying their best to keep up with the speaker. What happens next?
Here's where we bring in a secret weapon recording. Record yourself while you're shadowing, and then listen back to that recording, comparing it to the original audio. It's like holding a mirror up to your own pronunciation. Your intonation, how smoothly you're speaking.
Wow, that's a brilliant idea. It's like having a personal speech coach right there in your pocket. What specifically should our listeners be paying attention to when they listen back to their recordings?
There are a few key things to focus on. First, listen to how you're pronouncing individual sounds. Are you getting them right? Then pay attention to where you're putting the stress in words and sentences. Are you emphasizing the right syllables? And is your intonation natural? Does your voice rise and fall in the right places? Finally, listen to your overall fluency and rhythm. Are you speaking smoothly? Does it sound natural?
So it's all about analyzing those finer points of spoken English, which can be hard to catch when you're in the moment of shadowing. I can see how listening back to a recording would be incredibly helpful. So our listener has shadowed, recorded themselves, listened back, and identified some areas where they want to improve. What's the next step in this process?
It's simple practice, practice, practice. Repetition is key with shadowing. Go back and listen to the same audio clip multiple times. each time focusing on getting a little closer to the native speaker's delivery. It's like refining a skill. Each time you practice, you smooth out the rough edges and get a bit closer to mastery.
So consistency is key, right? Make shadowing a regular part of your language learning routine. But I have to ask, wouldn't it get a bit boring listening to the same audio over and over again? How do you keep things fresh and engaging?
That's a great question, Mike, and it's where those tips about choosing material you enjoy come into play. If you're genuinely interested in what you're listening to, the repetition becomes less about drudgery and more about deepening your understanding and appreciation for the nuances of the language. And to add even more variety and challenge, you can start experimenting with some advanced shadowing techniques.
Advanced techniques. Okay, now you've got my attention. Tell me more about these now.
So remember how we talked about shadowing being like a dance between your ears and your mouth? Well, let's get the rest of your body involved. One technique I call shadowing with movement.
Shadowing with movement. That sounds interesting. How does that work?
It's precisely what it sounds like instead of sitting still while you shadow. Try walking around, maybe even using hand gestures as you speak. This helps you simulate real-life conversations, where we're rarely just standing frozen like statues.
Right, so it's like taking your shadowing practice out of the classroom and into the real world. I love that idea. What other advanced techniques do you have up your sleeve?
This next one is for those who are feeling a bit more adventurous and want to push their listening skills to the limit. It's called shadowing without transcripts.
Wow, okay, that sounds like a real challenge. No safety net of the written word to fall back on.
Exactly, you're relying solely on your ears, forcing yourself to really tune into the sounds of the language. Now, I wouldn't recommend this for beginners, but once you have a good foundation, ditching the transcript can be a powerful way to accelerate your progress.
It's like taking off the training wheels and really riding that English fluency bike on your own. I like the sense of adventure here. What else have we got?
All right, this next technique is all about expanding your horizons and embracing the beautiful diversity of English accents. We'll call it shadowing different accents.
Oh yes, the world of English accents is vast and fascinating. From the crisp British accent to the laid-back Australian vibe, there's so much to explore.
Absolutely. Each accent has its unique melody and rhythm. By shadowing different accents, you're not only training your ears to understand diverse ways of speaking, but you're also adding more tools to your pronunciation toolbox. You become a more versatile and adaptable English speaker.
It's like spicing up your English-speaking palette with different flavors from around the world. I can already picture our listeners confidently navigating conversations with people from all over the globe. Okay, Sarah, what's the final advanced technique in your arsenal?
This last one is all about bringing your English speaking to life. We'll call it shadowing with emotion.
Intriguing. It sounds like we're about to tap into some acting skills here.
You could say that it's about going beyond simply mimicking words and trying to embody the speaker's emotional state as you're shadowing. If they're excited, let your voice reflect that excitement. If they're expressing sadness or concern, let those emotions color your tone. It's all about adding authenticity and depth to your spoken English.
That's fantastic. It's like you're not just shadowing the speaker, you're embodying their entire persona. I could see how this would take your English speaking to a whole new level. Now, Sarah, I know we've been talking about all the positive aspects of shadowing, but I think it's important to acknowledge that, as with any learning technique, there are going to be some challenges along the way.
Absolutely, Mike. Even the most dedicated English learners are going to hit some bumps in the road. But the good news is that most of these challenges are completely surmountable. It's all about recognizing them, understanding why they happen, and having a few strategies up your sleeve to overcome them.
That sounds like a great plan. Let's dive into some of those common challenges and offer our listeners some practical solutions. What's the first hurdle we should tackle?
One of the most common things I hear from learners is, the audio's too fast. I can't keep up.
Oh, I've been there. It's like trying to drink from a fire hose.
Yeah, it can be really overwhelming, especially when you're first starting out. But don't worry, there are a couple of things you can do. First, try adjusting the playback speed. Most audio players let you slow things down a bit, which can make a world of difference.
Right. Take advantage of that slow motion button.
Another thing to consider is the material you're choosing. If you're struggling with speed, try opting for something that's naturally slower paced. There are lots of podcasts and audiobooks specifically designed for English learners that speak at a more manageable speed.
So it's all about finding that sweet spot, something that challenges you, but doesn't leave you feeling completely lost. Okay, what's another common roadblock people tend to run into?
This one often goes hand in hand with the speed issue. I can't keep up. I keep losing my place.
Ah, yes, the dreaded falling behind feeling, like trying to juggle too many balls at once.
Exactly, and this can happen even with slower audio, especially if the sentences are long and complex, or if the speaker has a very fast speaking style. One thing that can help is to break things down into smaller chunks. Instead of trying to shadow a whole sentence at once, focus on shorter phrases. Pause after each one to give yourself time to repeat and process.
So it's like taking bite-sized pieces instead of trying to swallow the whole thing at once.
Right, and remember our friend lagged shadowing. That technique is especially helpful when you're feeling overwhelmed. Give yourself that extra beat after the speaker finishes to let your brain catch up and prepare your mouth for the repetition.
Lagged shadowing to the rescue. I love it. Okay, what other challenges do our listeners need to be prepared for?
Sometimes the challenge isn't so much about speed or keeping up, but about understanding the words themselves.
Ah, the vocabulary barrier. That can be really frustrating.
It can be, but don't let it derail you. If you're using material that has a transcript, take advantage of that. Pause the audio, look up the word you don't understand, and then keep going. You could even start a vocabulary notebook where you jot down new words and phrases to review later.
Turning those vocabulary hurdles into learning opportunities. I like that. What about those times when the challenge isn't external, but rather internal?
I know precisely what you mean. One of the biggest hurdles for a lot of language learners is self-consciousness. That feeling of, I sound silly, or I'm not doing this right.
Oh, the inner critic can be so loud sometimes. I definitely struggle with that myself.
It's incredibly common, and it's important to remember that making mistakes is a normal part of learning anything new, especially a language. No one expects you to sound perfect right away, so be kind to yourself, embrace those stumbles, and focus on progress over perfection.
That's such an important reminder. And if you find yourself really struggling with self-consciousness, try practicing in private at first. Find a safe space where you can experiment and make mistakes without feeling judged. The more you practice, the more confident you'll become.
Exactly. It's all about building that confidence muscle. And speaking of tools and resources, Mike, are there any particular platforms or materials you'd recommend for shadowing?
You know, there are so many great resources out there these days. YouTube is a fantastic place to start. You can find channels specifically geared towards English learners with clear audio and often transcripts or subtitles available.
Absolutely. And don't forget about podcasts. There are tons of podcasts designed for language learners covering a wide range of topics and accents.
Podcasts are great for on-the-go learning, and if you're looking for something more interactive, there's some really cool language learning apps that incorporate shadowing into their lessons.
It's amazing how technology has opened up so many possibilities for language learners. But at the end of the day, regardless of the specific tools or techniques you choose, the most important thing is to be patient with yourself and enjoy the process. Learning a language takes time and effort, so celebrate those small victories along the way, and don't be afraid to experiment and find what works best for you.
Couldn't have said it better myself, Sarah.
Yeah.
Well, I think we've covered a lot of ground today, from the fundamentals of shadowing to some pretty advanced techniques, and even those inevitable challenges that come with the territory.
I hope our listeners feel equipped and inspired to give shadowing a try. It really is a game changer.
I agree. It's like a secret weapon for unlocking fluency and confidence in spoken English. And who knows, maybe one day we'll be shadowing you, our listeners, as you confidently navigate the world of English speaking.
That's a great goal to strive for.
Well, that's a wrap for today's deep dive into shadowing. A huge thank you to Sarah for sharing her expertise with us. And to all of you listening, remember to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more English learning tips and tricks. Until next time, happy shadowing.